And hello, everybody. Welcome back to Unslaved. We have another episode for you today. We're going to be getting into one of Michael's latest articles talking about words. And I'll pull it up on screen here so you can all see it. But if you go to michaeltsarian.com, check out the articles. In Words We Trust is the article we're going to get into here today. And we'll link everything below for you. But Michael, new article talking about words. We're in some interesting word battle times, propaganda, social media, the news, the political battles. This is a war of words. It's a war on consciousness, as you've always said. So maybe a quick little introduction to this new article.
Yeah, thanks. It sort of follows on from what we did with, the God in Ruins idea. They're very connected in many ways. It's just that we kept that very broad so that we wouldn't lose sight of a very, very large theory. But when you start to take on board devolution, right, in fact, I did hint at it toward the end of that podcast, and that is that we interlock with not so much the thoughts of others, but the words of others, right? And I used the Julian Jaynes sort of metaphor there about, that he talks about a time in which not only was there neurological changes in our brain, right, the splitting of the hemispheres, but that was already precipitated by an age of catastrophe that he actually talks very little about, but it is there in his work, right? And he's looking more at about 3000 BC, and there's certainly a case to be made for that. It could have been before that. The dates are difficult because, like I point out in my work, is a series of cataclysmic events that was precipitated by the war of the gods, so to speak, right? So when you have a major event, and that could have been as long as 50,000 years ago, then in my work, I've really had no reason to change this general outline. That later after that, you get a pole shift. But whereas all the other people who know about a pole shift just think that happened as a matter of course, right? A natural event. I tie it into that this was a consequence of an atomic type war that was unleashed by beings on this planet, right? And then after that, as I point out in the Irish Origins and in Atlantis, there's a series of other disturbances leading up to Thera, right? And Santorini, the plague in Egypt, the Bronze Age famine, the Storegga tsunami. A lot of things to me, the drying up of the Sarasvati River, all of this and many other traumas. There's a whole thing about the Mediterranean, by the way, that's very important, because it talks about the weathering on the Sphinx, right? So Robert Schoch has his idea about that. He sort of saw that. Yeah, but his take is not the only take. There's new findings from people about that weathering, alternative findings, like maybe a torrential period. So when those people speak about that the weathering on the Sphinx is indicative of the Sphinx being many, many years older, that's viable. I'm for that, right? But I always make sure that I, try to cross-reference that with other theories that might account for something like that. It's very important to do that. And one of them is that there was a torrential period, far more recent to us, right, that could account for that weathering and so on. So it's not just straightforward. But the only reason why the mainstream hasn't pushed that anti-Robert Schoch theory is because, unfortunately, when they try to advocate it, it leads to controversy just as much as Robert Schoch does. So they got themselves into a cul-de-sac. We don't like Robert Schoch and his ideas. Here's our alternative. Oops, no, stop. We got to change the court date because it actually talked about the Mediterranean and the Delta in ways that also spoke of catastrophism. Shit, right? So they hurriedly found stuff that actually didn't do them any. So there's theories out there, but they'll be buried unless you know where to go, right? So the alternative theories are there as well. But it's the same thing. Once you understand that this age, this bicameral age, right, caused a psychosomatic split, well, how do you define it? And you see, then the beauty of Julian Jaynes is he explains it in most intriguing ways. And one of the ways is this, and this needs to be put in as a background for where we're going, right? When the voice of the gods, right, which was a standard way that the whole human race prior to the cataclysm operated. This is the most extraordinary thing. That's why it's a bit difficult for people to handle it. Do you mean to tell me that then we just had instruction in your head? Well, I'll go, do you mean to tell me that you have these things called thoughts? Come on, nobody can point at a thought. Well, it's just as mysterious as that. You hear voices in your head today, it's called thoughts. So what's so bizarre about, the pre-bicameral period when those were louder and they were more instructive, and whereas we have a monkey mind now where those thoughts are as disturbing as they are helpful. In the pre-bicameral age, they were not disturbing. There was no monkey mind. It was a very different comportment. The Doctor Who show, Mask of the Mandragora, goes into this. And everyone who has their take on it has a little bit of ambivalence. Were these voices archonic, demonic, robotic, therefore bad? Or were they the voices of the gods, right? And James is just simply leaving, because who can decide? It pertains to our times right now. The instruction of the UN, the instruction of your local government. A lot of people go, thank you, government, hail! You've come in at a time of extraordinary, phantom bugs and diseases. I know they're there and you're saving us, right? Or you have the other side of the naysayers are going, government, out of my fucking life, out of my business. I don't want to hear you, right? So this is kind of where we're going in this conversation. We've got this election coming up right now. That's going to be words, 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 words. So all of our instruction, all of what we consider consciousness is built out of words. What do we know about those words, right? But again, just filling in the background, when the instruction of the gods ceased or diminished, Jane shows how it diminishes over time, like a sort of a radio frequency where, it's coming through loud and clear, but suddenly, who scored? Oh my God, I went on the blink just at that moment. I put 10 to 1 on that. So as it started to fade, man got desperate. And it was almost like there's a Doctor Who called Castro Valva. The ending of that show is exactly what I'm talking about. It's chaos. It's like some MC Escher goblins just running around, bucket and spade in hand, with nowhere to go. Ghostly figures, ghostly beings. We were just walking around in a state of total trance, screaming at the sky. It's where a lot of religious tenets come from. Because when the voices of the gods departed, we immediately, like a lot of people would do, felt shame. That's why the Bible, the Judaism and Christianity is so full of guilt and shame, and I'm a sinner, right? Because we actually thought that the reason why the God's voice is gone is something we've done. So actually, we don't want to get into this, but Julian Jaynes shows that mankind for hundreds and hundreds of years was obsessed with sacrifice and what can I do to bring the voice of the gods back? And of course, it's trial and error, isn't it? And if you sacrifice 100 souls on a ziggurat, you might actually feel for a while that the voices are back, and it went ebb and flow like this for years and years and years. And then come along a priest class that said, you're doing it wrong. You need us to tell you what to do. And we were so susceptible, so impotent that we decided to listen to what these guys had to say. And of course, that's going on to this day. The advent of religion, he says, came about because we then had to trust something or someone. And this is the origin of the L's, the origin of the priesthood of the Illies and anything, right, that then resembles, Billy Graham on steroids. They're going to tell you what to do. And then the code books of what to do, right, the Code of Hammurabi, the Code of Mani, the Code of, various prophets of the Old Testament, the Roman law. It's all there. It's all codified. It's all a matter of words, Then we move up to typing. We move into the digital kingdom. And the digital kingdom is bicameral, isn't it? There's nothing there. This pixels that you've got right now is nothing. It's nothingness.
Yeah, it's like an illusion.
It's the virtual kingdom. Exactly. And yet we take it for reality. It's just simulacra. Somebody said, of course, this is slightly untrue. You do if you look at a photograph of yourself. But for the most part in our life, we don't even see a true image of our own face. Because it's like the reverse when you look into a mirror and so on, right? So for many centuries, people didn't really even look at their own faces until photographs came about. Even when you're looking at yourself in a reflected pool, it's opposite. So what that tells us a great deal, right? But the main point is that when the voices of the gods receded, many of the phenomena that still exist today came online. The only two I remember of importance, super importance, was the priests. And by the way, a little nuance about that is it wasn't priests, it was priestesses. So there's your female Illuminati tie-in. And I do mention that in the female Illuminati work, that actually the priestesses were the first ones we hearkened to, not male priests. The reason why they dress in robes and have long hair and all of that is because they were actually copying the original Bronze Age, cults that had arisen. Don't confuse it with the matriarchy. It's not that. It's a small group of extremely powerful women. Men are still ruling the tribe and helping us survive. But out of this came then this priestess class, not to be confused with matriarchy. The male rule was still The kingship was still in place, right? Then later, when the women abused their right as oracles, the men took over, the usual scuffling and fighting, right? I talk about that in an article called From Heaven to Earth, but that the women were the first interpreters, right? But quickly moving on from that, then came divination. The whole thing with the entrails and all of this, right? Man was up to all sorts of tricks. Many of them, and in doing so, he was doing it, his reason to do it was to get back in touch with the voice of the gods. But out of divination came some positive things as well, right? Which have to do with natural mysticism and, and the fact that, the lines on the back of a tortoise can, in fact, just like the palm on, the lines on your hand, do actually have some connectivity to the universe. But that's not what they were looking for. It just turned out that was almost discovered, almost accidentally. But it does turn out that probabilities, right? It did have relevance. It's not as boogaloo as the naysayer thinks. It turns out that the I Ching, and tarot and all actually do have significance. Now, the tarot is a specific archive, in this connectivity to the inner zodiac, to the bicameral period. That's almost special, as maybe somebody could argue astronomy is, right? So astrology is, because of the symbols that it uses and everything. You're never going to understand, anything to do with tarot or astrology unless you understand this fall off from the voices of the gods, right? So they were replacements. Some are wholly inefficient. Some are way too mathematically hindered. And others are, simpler. I've worked all my life on this kind of thing, but we're not going to get into it in any detail. But basically what that's meant to do is kind of be an augury system by which, okay, it's not the voice of the gods, but it's sort of the next best thing. It's what's ever left of that ancestral intelligence working with you on a symbolic level, And people are quite right to think of it in terms of, possible danger. You're right. I didn't invent that. I'm not denying it. But I've always said it's up to your purity. It's up to your level of intention as well. It's very important and all of that. So then James is saying that then, this is his background, right? But where we were in God in Ruins, I added this little caveat, and I think it's perfectly consistent with his theories. And that is, we don't only went to high priests and high priestesses. We didn't only go to the local soothsayer. We didn't already cast, I Chings and all of the rest of it. The runes would be a perfect example of this, right? Not only did all of that arrive, right, for good or for bad, but a psychological obsession with the words of other people. That's what the article was trying to do, right? And the latest article does the same. Because I believe the soothsayers are back. Now that has been set up, right, an obsessive reliance on the words of others, that's how you get your Rhonda Byrnes, that's how you get your Eckhart Tolles, because I know a lot of well-meaning people have tried to critique the existence of those people. A lot of Christians do, right? They don't like it any more than I do, and they give their 2 cents about why we shouldn't be listening to these coaches and, these law of attraction people. A lot of good points that they're making, but it's all inadequate. What we're talking about now is the real reason why those guys are bad is because those are the soothsayers I've just spoken about that made hay in the bicameral period, right? We're hinterlanded or ostracized by society in the modern age while we get scientism and we got infatuation with science. But they're creeping back. In fact, it's an old Gnostic cult, right? Maybe we can touch on that too later on. But this cult is back in the sense that they've now understood where they can fit in. They've worked on the fact that man is obsessed with guidance from others and from the words of others. That's how I broke it down. And by God, they're back. And so my warning has gone out that, hey, be very careful now. We need to re-examine the whole question of words, of influence of words, whether it be from an Adolf Hitler or, an Obama or whoever it might be, and just review it. Not again, draw any judgments about it, but bring it as part of our kit to realize how susceptible we are, how much we've learned from words. Are words pictures? What kind of pictures do they arise in our minds, right? In nature, there's no words. When we go out into the umwelt, we do not have any verbal communication back. There's something, when you can't talk to the sun and get the sun to start speaking back to you and all of that. Yet there is a kind of a communicativeness there, isn't there? It's in the midwelt. So while we're enclosed in this prison of the midwelt, words become then very, very important. It's the main reason we have consciousness. It's the main reason we know things. It's the main reason we change the world.